He inserted it into the incorrect opening, Reddit cheating tales, a genuine infidelity narrative. Greetings to Infidelity Tales. If you're just joining us, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. It takes just a moment, yet it inspires us to craft even more narratives. Kindly give this video a thumbs up, and now, let us embark on the tale. I never imagined I would end up in this predicament. I was raised in a quaint little town, nurturing dreams of a straightforward, joyful existence. I wed my college sweetheart, Adam, when we were both youthful and brimming with optimism. We may not have possessed much, but we had one another, and that was sufficient. Or so I believed. Reflecting on the past, I can now discern the indications of what lay ahead. Yet, in that moment, I couldn't have envisioned it. I encountered Mr. Thompson, our landlord, when Adam and I initially settled into the quaint house we rented. The dwelling may not have been grand, but it belonged to us. It possessed a delightful warmth, a quaint garden, and a charming little backyard that I cherished. Both Adam and I were thrilled about this new chapter unfolding in our lives. Mr. Thompson was a man of maturity, in his early 60s. He possessed a warm expression, consistently beaming whenever we encountered him. He was the type of landlord who would occasionally drop by to ensure everything was fine with the house. I recall the initial occasion he arrived to repair a damaged fence. He exhibited such courtesy, inquiring if we required anything, and consistently engaging in light conversation about the transformations the neighborhood had undergone throughout the years. I didn't give it much thought at the time. He was simply a kind, older gentleman. However, a gradual transformation began to unfold. With Adam's job pulling him away from home more frequently, I found myself increasingly alone in the house. It was during these times that I started to see Mr. Thompson in a new way. He would drop by unexpectedly more frequently, occasionally to inspect the house, other times simply to engage in conversation. Initially, I believed it to be innocuous. Ultimately, he held the role of our landlord. However, as time passed, I started to sense a change in the way we communicated. One afternoon, I was tending to the garden in the backyard when Mr. Thompson happened to stop by. He had been visiting more often, and while I appreciated his presence, there was an unsettling quality to his arrivals that I couldn't quite shake off. He was consistently kind, yet there was a subtle intensity in his gaze that stirred a sense of unease within me. On that specific afternoon, he lingered longer than he typically would. We discussed the weather, the garden, and eventually delved into the intricacies of life. In those moments, I started to perceive a unique intrigue in his demeanor. "Is this place bringing you joy?" they inquired of me that day, gazing at me in a manner that left me feeling somewhat vulnerable. I found myself uncertain about how to respond. Naturally, I felt content with Adam. Yet I began to sense a growing distance between us, particularly due to his extended hours at work. At moments, I experienced a profound sense of solitude, even when he was at home. However, I was reluctant to confess that to Mr. Thompson, certainly not in a loud voice. I smiled and nodded, attempting to dismiss the thought, yet Mr. Thompson persisted. At times, he remarked, "It can be simple too. It's easy to overlook the significance of having someone to converse with, to truly feel that someone is paying attention." It was inexplicable, yet the manner in which he expressed it sent a chill coursing through me. His words hung in the atmosphere, echoing long after his departure. I dismissed it, reassuring myself that it was merely a casual exchange. However, as Mr. Thompson visited more frequently, I began to observe subtle changes in his conduct. His compliments, once light-hearted, started to bear a significance I wasn't accustomed to. He would remark on my appearance, noting how well I cared for myself and how I maintained my looks. Initially, I perceived his actions as mere kindness, but it quickly became apparent that he was observing details that seemed to escape everyone else. One evening, Adam found himself on a business trip. It was a serene evening, and I found myself nestled. Resting on the couch, engrossed in a book, the sudden chime of the doorbell interrupted the tranquility. I was caught off guard. So I paused before responding. As I swung the door open, there was Mr. Thompson, a smile lighting up his face. "I happened to be in the area," he remarked. "So I thought I'd drop in and check that everything was okay." I offered a courteous smile, retreating slightly to allow him entry. It had become routine for him to drop by unexpectedly. So I didn't give it much thought. He entered the living room, and we started conversing, just like we always used to. Yet, this time, an unusual tension hung in the atmosphere. The way he gazed at me stirred an unsettling feeling within me. It wasn't anything obvious, just a glance, a prolonged stare, but it was sufficient to quicken my heartbeat. During our conversation, Mr. Thompson positioned himself nearer to me than he typically does. The distance between us seemed to diminish, and his presence grew increasingly tangible. I recall the sound of laughter. Uncomfortably at something he said, attempting to dismiss the increasing unease in my chest. I reassured myself that he was merely being cordial. That my reactions were exaggerated. However, just as if he could perceive my unease, Mr. Thompson leaned in a bit closer and softly rested his hand on the arm of the sofa. "You know," he said, "it's rare to encounter someone like you. A person who truly pays attention. A person who genuinely shows concern." The words appeared harmless at first glance. Yet there was an unsettling quality in his tone, a certain inflection that sent shivers down my spine. I felt the urge to distance myself, to express my discomfort, yet I held back. Instead, I let out a nervous laugh and drew my legs up to my chest, attempting to establish some space between us, even if it was merely a physical barrier. Mr. Thompson observed the change in my posture. And for a brief moment, an unspoken understanding lingered in the air between us. He gazed at me, his eyes gentle. Yet there was an undeniable intensity lurking beneath the surface that I couldn't overlook. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to take a moment to express my appreciation for you. Sarah, you truly are a remarkable individual." The way he uttered my name left me momentarily breathless. My heart raced within me, and I found myself at a loss for words. I felt the urge to express something, anything, to ease the palpable tension, yet the right words eluded me. I felt as though I was ensnared in that instant, immobilized and unable to move. Before I could utter a word, Mr. Thompson rose to his feet. "I suppose I should let you return to your evening," he said, offering another smile. There was an oddity in the smile, an elusive quality that I couldn't quite identify. "I wanted to reach out and see how you're doing." I nodded, my throat parched, and observed him as he departed from the house. As the door clicked shut behind him, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I sat there, gazing at the door as if time had stretched into infinity, attempting to unravel the chaos of recent events. I had never experienced such inner turmoil before. A part of me longed to share with Adam the turmoil I had been experiencing, yet another part held me back, gripped by shame and fear of his potential judgment. I sought to avoid creating any issues. I wanted to avoid causing him any doubt or, even worse, making him angry. However, the deeper I delved into my thoughts, the clearer it became that I couldn't overlook the emotions Mr. Thompson was stirring within me. It was inappropriate, and I had no desire to support it. Still, I couldn't dismiss the nagging sensation that his visits held deeper significance than he was revealing. What was I meant to do? With each passing day, Mr. Thompson's visits grew increasingly regular. Whenever he appeared, a familiar wave of discomfort and unease washed over me. I attempted to dismiss it, yet it was increasingly difficult to overlook. He had an undeniable quality that sent my heart racing, and I found myself unable to understand the reason behind it. I understood the necessity of caution, recognizing that I couldn't allow circumstances to spiral beyond control. Yet, I sensed that beneath the surface, a transformation was unfolding. I simply wasn't aware of the extent to which it would unfold. As days morphed into weeks, the tension between Mr. Thompson and me intensified. I still hadn't shared with Adam the peculiar encounters with our landlord. A part of me was anxious that he might not comprehend, or even worse, that he could become angry and upset with me. In the end, I was merely attempting to be amicable, wasn't I? It was merely casual conversation, nothing beyond that, correct? That's what I conveyed. Every time Mr. Thompson appeared at the house unexpectedly, I attempted to dismiss my increasing discomfort. Yet, the discomfort had become too palpable to dismiss any longer. I found myself unable to shake off the memory of Mr. Thompson's gaze, the way his fingers had grazed the armrest of the couch. During that one visit, it felt as though he was attempting to forge a bond that transcended mere neighborly or landlord-tenant dynamics. I found myself revisiting that moment repeatedly in my thoughts, with each replay intensifying the tension inside me. On a serene Tuesday evening, I found myself solitary in the kitchen, meticulously chopping vegetables for dinner. I had always found joy in cooking, but tonight it seemed more like a task than a source of solace. My mind wandered, and an unsettling sense lingered that an event was on the brink of unfolding. I was just beginning to season the chicken when the familiar sound of the doorbell interrupted my thoughts. My heart raced. As I gazed through the kitchen window, I spotted Mr. Thompson at the door, his familiar warm smile lighting up his face. I hadn't encountered him in a few days, and while I ought to have felt a sense of relief, an unusual knot began to twist in my stomach. I dried my hands on a towel, inhaled deeply, and approached the door. "Good evening, Sarah," Mr. Thompson greeted warmly as I opened it. "I trust I'm not intruding on anything important." "No, not at all," I replied, mustering a smile. I moved aside to allow him entry, and he walked into the house with confidence, as if it were the most ordinary thing imaginable. He cast a quick look around, his gaze momentarily landing on the kitchen, where I had been busy preparing dinner. "The aroma in here is delightful," he remarked, his eyes lingering on the dish I was preparing. I acknowledged your skills in the kitchen with a polite nod, feeling uncertain about how to reply. "It's merely a straightforward meal for dinner, nothing extraordinary." "You always say that," Mr. Thompson chuckled, "but you have a knack for turning the simplest things into something remarkable." The compliment was pleasant, I guess, but it had a different weight when it came from him. It was different from the praise I had received from friends, or even Adam. They carried a certain heaviness, as if he were perceiving something within me that transcended mere concerns of food or shelter. I found myself feeling uneasy once more. Yet I made an effort to dismiss the sensation. "Thank you," I replied, dismissing it lightly. "Is there anything you require? I take it you're here to look into something." Mr. Thompson's expression changed subtly. He appeared to pause before giving his answer. "Actually, I was hoping we could have a moment to chat. It has been some time since we last engaged in a meaningful dialogue." I found myself taken aback. We had consistently shared friendly remarks during his visits. Yet we had never engaged in an extended dialogue. I was aware he had frequented the area recently, but I hadn't anticipated his desire to engage in deeper conversation. I experienced a sudden wave of anxiety, yet I nodded regardless. "Absolutely, we can take a seat together." I guided him into the living room and motioned for him to settle onto the couch. I took my place in the chair that was my usual spot during our TV time, facing him directly. An uncomfortable stillness hung in the air before Mr. Thompson broke the silence, his voice carrying a weight I had never encountered from him before. He started off at a measured pace. "Recently, I've found myself reflecting deeply on life. concerning the evolution of things throughout time. It's simple to become immersed in the daily grind, to overlook what truly holds significance. I found myself uncertain about his direction with this. I understand your perspective, I replied carefully. Life can become quite hectic, and at times, it can be challenging to stay focused on what truly matters. Mr. Thompson nodded, his gaze probing into mine. Precisely. However, it is equally crucial to keep in mind that there are moments when we must pause and ensure we're genuinely experiencing life, not merely existing. His words carried an unsettling weight, leaving me at a loss for how to reply. I was completely in the dark about his implications, and I wasn't certain I was ready to uncover the truth. Sarah, he murmured, leaning in just a bit. I find it difficult to articulate, but there has been a unique bond between us since our first encounter, a connection that I simply cannot overlook. I can't express how often I've reflected on our discussions, the manner in which you present yourself. You are an extraordinary woman. And it's challenging to express just how deeply I admire you. I sensed my breath hitch in my throat. His words carried a warmth, yet they resonated with the weight of a revelation. There was something in the way he expressed those words that sent my heart racing, but not in a pleasant manner. I found myself in a sudden bind, uncertain of how to respond. My thoughts surged, searching for the right words, anything that could ease the thick tension hanging in the air. I am at a loss for words, I murmured, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. Thank you for the kind words, Mr. Thompson, but I must mention that I am happily married. I cherish my husband deeply. He appeared unfazed by what I said. He reclined in his chair, observing me intently for a moment, his face a mask of inscrutability. I understand, he said softly, his tone nearly remorseful. I wish to avoid making you uneasy, Sarah. Yet I cannot ignore my own feelings. What I experience. His words surged through me like a bolt of lightning. I had heard him express admiration for me before, but this time it felt distinct. His gaze held a depth and intensity that went beyond the surface. A surge of fear and confusion washed over me. This had evolved beyond a mere friendly landlord's check-in. It had taken on a different dimension, one that left me uncertain about how to navigate it. I don't want to create any issues between you and your husband, Mr. Thompson continued. But I couldn't keep pretending that I wasn't drawn to you. I simply had to express my feelings to you. I was at a loss for words. I parted my lips, yet the words eluded me. I was reluctant to cause him pain, yet I also wanted to avoid leading him on with any unrealistic expectations. What was I meant to do in this situation? How can I convey to him that I am married and not interested in pursuing anything beyond my relationship with Adam? At last, I inhaled deeply, my heart racing within my chest. Mr. Thompson, I stated with conviction, I appreciate your honesty, but I must be straightforward with you. I am devoted to my husband and fully committed to our marriage. Thank you for your kindness. But I prefer to keep our relationship strictly professional as landlord and tenant. A lengthy silence hung in the air, and I noticed the disappointment briefly flash in his eyes. He gazed at his hands, then nodded with deliberation. I understand, he said softly. I apologize if my actions caused you any discomfort. That was never my aim. I nodded. A wave of relief sweeping through me. The tension that once enveloped us appeared to fade, yet it left a subtle discomfort in its wake. I was unable to shake the sense that nothing would ever return to its former state, that Mr. Thompson's emotions for me would persist, regardless of my recognition of them. He rose to his feet. And I did the same. Thank you for listening, he said, his voice gentle yet tinged with a trace of melancholy. I'll let you enjoy your evening. I want you to understand that I honor your boundaries. Sarah. I simply wanted to express my feelings to you. I managed a smile, attempting to conceal the unease that continued to simmer beneath the surface. Within me, "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," I expressed. "I'll catch you later." As he stepped through the threshold, I lingered for a moment, gazing at the vacant spot he once occupied. My thoughts swirled in a chaotic dance. I was in disbelief over what had just transpired. I was married to Adam, and yet I had just engaged in this conversation with our landlord. What was happening? And why did it seem as though my whole existence was gradually coming apart at the seams? I shook my head, attempting to dispel the uncertainties. I needed to concentrate on my journey with Adam, to recall the affection and dedication we embraced. Yet, a persistent, unsettling sensation within me whispered that this was far from finished. Following my discussion with Mr. Thompson, I made an effort to set the whole situation aside. I was concerned about how it might impact my relationship with Adam, and I certainly didn't want to make things more complicated with our landlord. Yet, despite my efforts to conceal my emotions, they lingered on. The weight of guilt and confusion hung in the air, leaving me in a state of perpetual second-guessing about the interaction. A few days later, Mr. Thompson made another unexpected appearance. My heart constricted in my chest when I heard the doorbell. I found myself unprepared for yet another uncomfortable dialogue. Yet I understood the necessity of confronting it directly. I opened the door, striving to maintain my poise. "Greetings, Sarah." He welcomed me, his tone inviting yet cautious. I wanted to touch base and confirm that everything is still in order with the house. I inclined my head, putting on a smile. "All is well, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for your inquiry." He appeared to pause before proceeding. "I've been reflecting deeply on what I mentioned it previously. I apologize if I caused you any discomfort. I acknowledge your limits and I honor that. I simply couldn't bear the thought of leaving anything unexpressed." I gazed at him for an extended moment, sensing the gravity of the words he had uttered. I needed to stand my ground now. There was no space for doubt. "I appreciate your understanding, but I must be explicit. I am in a marital union. My attention is directed towards my union with Adam is my priority. And I must eliminate any distractions. I appreciate our professional connection, but that is the extent of it." Mr. Thompson's demeanor softened, yet a trace of sorrow lingered in his gaze. He nodded slowly, embracing my words with quiet acceptance. "I understand," he said softly. "I apologize if I crossed any boundaries." I inhaled deeply, experiencing a wave of relief wash over me. "It's all right. I simply wanted to confirm that we're aligned in our understanding." He offered a slight, courteous nod and began to walk away. As he walked away, I lingered in the doorway, observing his departure, overwhelmed by a swirl of feelings. Section of I felt a sense of sorrow that it had to reach this point. Yet another part of me was thankful for finally establishing the boundaries I required. That evening, Adam and I settled in for dinner, and for the first time in that moment, I experienced a profound sense of being fully engaged. The recent events lingered heavily on my mind, yet I understood the necessity of pressing onward. I needed to concentrate on what truly counted. My family, my dedication to Adam, and the love we cherished together. "Is everything all right?" Adam inquired, observing that I seemed more subdued than normal. I smiled, attempting to set aside the lingering thoughts. "Indeed, just pondering. Having you back is a wonderful feeling." He returned the smile, gently squeezing my hand. "It feels wonderful to be back in familiar surroundings." In that moment, I understood that despite the chaos or the intricacies of human feelings, my focus was unmistakable. I needed to safeguard the bond one shared with Adam. I was determined not to let anything or anyone hinder that, and I was certain that, regardless of the circumstances, we would navigate it together.